Numbered. Franken returned to work today on Capitol Hill for the first time since being hit with those sexual misconduct allegations. 4 women now on the list of those accusing him of groping and other activities. Franken told the Minnesota Star-Tribune just yesterday that he is embarrassed and ashamed by his past behavior and is pledging to work to regain the trust of women and his constituents. You're watching Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. Among the other things, because we knew yesterday that he would be giving this press avail just in his home state of Minnesota. So among the other things that he was asked about that he responded to, Senator Franken was asked whether or not he would face more groping allegations, and he answered, quote, "I don't know. I can't say." So what will he say when he steps up to the microphone moments from now? Joining us now is Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill. So this was a pop-up. We've heard a lot from him in just the last 24 hours, Mike. But more has happened with regard to people reacting to some of the words that I just read from yesterday.
Well, that's right, Harris. And, he did some local media interviews trying to make sure that things are solid back home, basically apologizing once again to his constituents back home in Minnesota. But we expected that Senator Franken would have to say something at some point to reporters here on Capitol Hill. He was trying to turn the page from this sexual harassment or inappropriate conduct scandal and try to get back to work. But bottom line, he'd kept a low profile, keeping away from national media over the Thanksgiving holiday. Said he was going to be reflecting about what went on, some of the allegations that came forward. Talked to local media outlets yesterday, but here he is trying to come back to work on a busy week here on Capitol Hill as senators are about to deal with tax reform, a huge issue that will affect all of his constituents and everyone's constituents. And so unless he wants cameras following him down the hall every step of the way all week long, he had to come out and say something. We don't know exactly what he will say, whether it will be more of the apology tour or whether he may have something in addition to say about perhaps an awareness of other allegations that may be coming forward. It's hard to say at this point, but we await the comments from Senator Franken any moment now, and this was something on short notice, and so great anticipation here on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, so, Mike, he has said that he is open to that ethics investigation, but he's also put a lot on the record in just the last day. He told the Minnesota Public Radio there up in St. Paul, "I take photographs at the state fair with thousands of people. I would never intentionally grope anyone, but we have to listen to the women and respect what they say." On the record, 3 women have accused Franken of grabbing their bottoms. I'm not even going to quote what it says. Grabbing their bottoms while taking photographs. So, I mean, he has put some stuff on the record here.
Well, that's right, Harrison. One of the reporters who interviewed Senator Franken said, he said he didn't remember those incidents with those women grabbing their bottoms, as they allege. And so she seemed to raise an eyebrow about that. Really? Something like that happened and you don't remember it? And so he's clearly embarrassed by this. He's clearly trying to turn the page. The question is, will he be able to by making some remarks here on Capitol Hill, or will the questions and will the allegations linger? I can tell you, after the initial photograph came out that appeared that he was goofing around with Leanne Tweeden, the radio news reporter, on that flight where it looked like he was grabbing her while she was sleeping, a lot of the female senators here on Capitol Hill said they could not get past that image. They were really deeply troubled by that. And so he's got some work to do to regain confidence of his colleagues here on Capitol Hill. And as you mentioned, that ethics investigation is expected to go forward to look into his conduct and to look into perhaps whether there may be more allegations out there yet to come forward.
Real quickly before I let you go, because this is going to happen momentarily, and, we want to be able to get to it live. Mike,
Sure.
What is kind of the mood, if you will, around this issue? I mean, not just with Al Franken, but with all that we have learned that has come out about payouts. We know with Representative Conyers about payouts to women for keeping quiet about things that may have happened. What is the mood around this issue of sexual misconduct or groping, sexual misbehavior, inappropriate behavior, and men in Congress?
Well, a lot of younger lawmakers in particular are saying the old days are gone, that the old bad behavior has to be gone. It cannot be tolerated any longer. The idea of quiet settlements with people who make allegations, a complicated process for staffers to come forward and file complaints against their bosses must change. And the idea that the government, the taxpayers, may pay for settlements. A lot of folks are saying that has to go too, that should be all public record in terms of who has been charged, who has settled, and how much they've settled for, and that the money should come out of the pockets of lawmakers going forward. We'll see how much is changed, but we know that there's an active push by a lot of folks for a lot more transparency here on Capitol Hill, not to just have the taxpayers sign a check and make a complaint go away, but to make it a lot more transparent, easier to do, and the bottom line that if lawmakers misbehave, that they should be the ones writing the checks and not American taxpayers.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about those quiet payments. It wasn't just that they were quiet, they were secretive, and they shut down the voices of those women who might have wanted to speak up at that time with non-disclosures. And now the question's about not just paying these women with taxpayer dollars, but paying them to be quiet, to not have a voice. I know from women in Congress, just talking with them, that this is a big issue on Capitol Hill, and it is bipartisan. I'll give you the last word.
No question about that, Harris. And as you mentioned, those non-disclosure agreements, somebody had to break a non-disclosure agreement for some of this stuff to come out about Congressman John Conyers of Michigan.
Exactly.
And so, bottom line, if there's been people who have behaved badly, I think they're quite anxious at this hour, Harris.
Mike Emanuel, we appreciate your reporting on Capitol Hill. We'll come back to you as the news warrants. Just a quick programming note. We do have on the program today, we've invited her. She's going to be joining me after Al Franken speaks. One of the women who's accused Representative Conyers of misconduct. So we'll be talking with her coming up shortly. Meanwhile, as we await Al Franken to step up to the microphones that you see there after having a whole day of media availability in his home state of Minnesota yesterday, awaiting to see what he will say to now a wider public beyond the constituents in Minnesota. Let's bring in Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico and co-author of Politico's Playbook. Jake, good to have you today. This was kind of a pop-up. Sometimes you'll get a cluster of these events, and so that's what's happening with the Senator Al Franken. As someone who's been covering this, what would you first ask Franken?
Well, I think a few things. I don't think he's going to resign. I think he's made that clear unless there's some other wave of allegations that come out, which he's not ruling out. And I do think, following up on what Mike just said, I do think cameras are going to follow him and they're going to ask. This is not going to go away, this pop-up press conference. He's going to face questions about his conduct both before he came to Congress and since he's been in Congress, regardless of what he says. This is just another installment of a string of interviews that Senator Franken is doing. You have to remember also, he's up for re-election in a couple of years, and that's going to be, there'll be another decision point then. But I do agree with Mike, this is pervasive. And what would I ask him? I think the first question to ask him is, are there more things that are going to come out? You seemed a little bit hedging your bets on that question yesterday. Why are you hedging your bets? Do you know of any other behavior like the ones like the behavior that's been described that have happened since you've been in Congress? I think that will be a question that he'll get today at that press conference.
Yeah, you know, I'm just looking over some of the transcripts from the several interviews that he gave, and they seem to echo exactly what you're saying, Jake, because he was asked on the record, well, will there be more? He says he doesn't know. I can't say I haven't done that in terms of being asked, would there be other women who would accuse you of maybe grabbing them or groping? He said, I can't say I haven't done that. I'm very sorry if these women experienced that. He reiterated this point to Minnesota Public Radio. I'm someone you know who hugs people. I've learned from these stories that in some of these encounters, I have crossed the line for some women.
Yeah, I think that's clear. And yes, it is true that Franken does take a lot of photos with constituents at big events like the Minnesota State Fair.
A lot of people take a lot of pictures.
Yes, that was my next line. I've taken photos with people, and I've never been in this situation myself. So I think that's an explanation that's not going to get him far with some of his colleagues. Now, listen, the Ethics Committee is going to investigate. They're going to presumably interview folks on Capitol Hill. But those investigations, speaking generally, because you can't really say anything about an investigation that you're not a part of, and obviously I'm not a member of Congress, but my experience with covering these things is they take a long time. They're not short endeavors, either on the House or Senate side. These investigations usually do last months, if not longer, and are quite extensive. So I don't think this will have any big closure to this anytime soon.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned the Ethics Committee, so I'm taking some notes as you talk about this. What are they exactly looking for? Because there's in some counts of this, and not with Al Franken that we know of at this point, there's a money flow with some of these men on Capitol Hill. You got Representative Conyers, $27,000 to keep a woman quiet about something that happened there that she alleges in detail about, and then the non-disclosures that we know about, and a bigger umbrella that has allowed members of Congress to utilize this sort of special treatment, if you will, that involves our tax dollars.
Yeah, I mean, there are rules when it comes to Capitol Hill, when it comes to Congress about members of Congress behavior. There is an element called conduct unbecoming of a member of Congress, which is kind of a broad catch-all. And we have to also keep in mind, if Roy Moore wins this election, the Republican in Alabama, he's going to immediately be under the same sort of ethics scrutiny that Franken and Conyers find themselves in on Capitol Hill. So this is not going to end with just these gentlemen. I think, I know, because I'm a reporter on Capitol Hill, that a lot of reporters are chasing all sorts of stories about members of Congress behavior on Capitol Hill in both parties. There's power dynamics on Capitol Hill, which could lead to some sort of various forms of unbecoming behavior. And I think we're at a point where this is not going to end anytime soon. This is not going to stop, and it's going to reach into both parties.
You know, Jake, I read what you write. I know you've got your own sources on Capitol Hill. I asked our reporter, Mike Emanuel, to describe the mood. I'm going to ask you, among your sources that you can share, what are you hearing about what's on the horizon for Al Franken? You say you don't expect him to resign. You've seen Conyers step away from his role in the House Judiciary, which makes sense because he's got an ethics investigation going on against him. But what's next for Al Franken that you're hearing?
I'm not sure what's next for him. I think what's next for the mood on... I mean, listen, he's going to get questions all the time. Senators and members of the House walk around without security details for the most part, walk among reporters all the time, and are always subject to lots of questions from reporters. So I imagine that he'll get lots of questions from reporters. But again, we have to keep in mind that this is not just these two gentlemen. There is a history of bad behavior in both parties on Capitol Hill. And from all the people I talked to who have been at least somewhat aware of this behavior in the past, or not aware, but it doesn't surprise them. I think this is going to take down, I don't know if it's going to force, ejections from Congress, but it's going to ensnare people from both parties, from the House and the Senate for the next couple months, if not longer. So what's next for Franken is less important than what's next for the institution.
Right. You know, I'm looking more back at his transcripts from yesterday. He told Minnesota Public Radio, he was talking specifically about that picture that had been taken with Tweeden, Ms. Tweeden, who was sleeping at the time, and it looked like he was putting his hands on her breasts in this photo. But clearly, whatever he was doing in her presence, she was not consensual because she was asleep, which is the definition, I would think, of non-consensual. But he said that it was inexcusable for him. So you've got somebody who's getting on the record with apologies, so on and so forth. That's the political side, I would think, or how is that being read from your sources on Capitol Hill?
I think a lot of people, and again, this is from my reporting, this is not, I'm reflecting what I'm hearing from people
Absolutely.
in Congress. This was behavior that happened before he was a senator, so that gives him, in these people's minds, a little bit of wiggle room from the ethics perspective. Doesn't make it any more appropriate. It gives the ethics committee a little bit less jurisdiction in their investigation because he was not a member of Congress. So I think that's one element to keep in mind. But again, if this is a pattern of behavior that continued into his time serving in Congress, he's been in Congress for, I think, almost 10 years, 8 years, then that will be a problem. That will be more problematic for him.
Yeah, I hear you saying that, and I think of what's happening now across the political aisle with Roy Moore facing an election in Alabama, and you talk about things that happened before they were in the Senate. Of course, he's not in Congress yet. So I'm looking at kind of the similarities of the words that you're using and kind of where we are, although the allegations are very different.
Yeah, totally. It would also give the Ethics Committee less jurisdiction to nail Roy Moore and try to get him out of Congress. Republicans have said, and obviously Roy Moore's a Republican, Republicans have said, many of them, that they would move to expel him. So that's an element that Roy Moore's going to have to deal with if he gets elected and he comes to Congress, is he's going to face a party in near revolt over his candidacy, over allegations that he pursued underage women. So again, not a particularly a stellar time for members of Congress and their behavior extracurricularly, let's say. I mean, this is a quite intense time for members of Congress and for, frankly, Americans who are looking at their legislature. And someone said this to me the other day, a member of Congress, an aide to a member of Congress said this to me the other day, that politically the view is going to become that Congress is just a bunch of old, dirty men chasing after women. And that's not exactly the case, but they're not really giving themselves a good argument to the contrary.
Well, you know, when you talk about a generation and you look at the alleged perpetrators in some of this, there's not a lot you can argue with about that. And then you have someone who's also in that same, and we want to be delicate about people's ages, but that same generation, if you will, and Nancy Pelosi, former House Speaker for the Democrats, defending first and then having to retract after a firestorm on Twitter defending Representative Conyers. When there's a paper trail there, there's a money trail there with him, with women. And so there is a second look. Not just politically, because Democrats have been on the record, quite frankly, recently about we need a new guard, so on and so forth. You hear that from them. But this puts that in a different light as well.
Well, I think what happened with House Democrats and with Pelosi is, yes, she went on Meet the Press and seemed to defend John Conyers. There was intense blowback, and then Conyers stepped down from his role as ranking member of Judiciary. I think the broader point about the need for new leadership on Capitol Hill, I'm writing a book right now about Congress in the era of Trump, and using that framework, there is a lot of discussion all the time about House Democrats being led by older people, by three leaders who are in their 70s, and that doesn't explain necessarily this behavior or Pelosi's defense of Conyers, but it is, given the larger context, it is a discussion that's happening on Capitol Hill.
All right, Jake Sherman, we appreciate your time today, and we are going to continue to watch the situation. For those of you in D.C., you saw the pop-up of this, and we're watching it, waiting for Senator Al Franken to step up. We've gone to members of our team here at Fox News. Mike Emanuel was there on Capitol Hill to try to see what the scuttlebutt is, what people are talking about, because outside of what Al Franken said to Minnesota media yesterday, we don't know what the planned statement will be. Jake Sherman with Politico was just telling us he doubts very seriously that we'll see the senator resign or step aside. But we don't know. And he got on the record with quite a bit. My next guests are both back from the outnumbered couch. They walked a few feet over. Hey, Jessica, I know you're down there.
How are you?
They can hear me. So can Steve. Jessica
Hello.
Tarlov, Senior Director of Research for Bustle.com, author of America in the Age of Trump. And Steve Cordes is back, former member of the Trump Hispanic Advisory Council, and they are both Fox News contributors. Steve, I'm going to go to you first. So you've got a situation in Congress right now, and you've got a senator who's about to step up to the microphone and tell us something about groping and allegations against him, misconduct allegations. This has got us far afield from tax reform and other things being talked about. And I want to remind everybody, Steve, because we were talking about it last hour, the Senate Finance Committee is meeting right now, and they're talking, we think, about tax reform with the president. There's a whole big backdrop that affects many Americans, almost all of us, going on as we await to see the senator step up and talk about, well, sex.
Right. No, I know. And isn't it unfortunate? You know, it really is, because we have a dysfunctional Congress, largely a do-nothing Congress. And by the way, I say this as a Republican. The American people handed the keys to the car to the Republican Party, both houses of Congress and the White House. And so far, I think the White House has done a magnificent job of producing growth and results for the American people. I think the Congress has done a miserable job of delivering on the mandate that the people gave to the Congress. So we focus, and I know he's not a Republican, obviously, Senator Franken, but I'm just saying in general, the dysfunction on Capitol Hill. What I find the worst part of this story, it's obviously awful if he acted like the...
All right, I'm going to cut in on you, Steve. Senator Al Franken has just walked up to the microphones. Let's hear what he has to say. We'll watch and listen together.
I've let a lot of people down, people of Minnesota, my colleagues, my staff, my supporters, and everyone who has counted on me to be a champion for women. To all of you, I just want to again say I am sorry. I know there are no magic words that I can say to regain your trust, and I know that's going to take time. I'm ready to start that process, and it starts with going back to work today. So now I'm going to take a few questions. Sam.
Yeah. You said in response to some of these allegations that you remember these encounters differently. I wanted to ask, how specifically does your recollection of these events differ from the women who came forward, and to what extent are you denying their accounts of what happened?
Well, there are different, different allegations. There's the Leanne Tweeden. Leanne and I were on the USO tour together, and on the Kiss at the rehearsal, we were rehearsing for a sketch. I said that I recall that differently from Leanne, but I feel that you have to respect, women's experience. And so I apologized to her, and I meant it, and I was, very grateful that she accepted it. As far as, I take a lot of pictures in Minnesota, thousands of pictures, meet tens of thousands of people. So those are instances that I do not remember. It has, from these stories, it's been clear that there are some women, and one is too many, who feel that I have done something disrespectful and that's hurt them, and for that I am tremendously sorry. And I know that I am going to have to be much more conscious when in these circumstances, much more careful, much more sensitive, and that this will not happen again going forward. Again, it's going to take a long time for me to regain people's trust, but I hope that starting work today that I can start to do that. Casey.
You made it clear you're not going to resign your Senate seat. There have been a lot of accusations against a lot of people that have been in the conversation lately. In your view, what's the bar for someone like you to have to resign? What kind of behavior demands a resignation?
I'm not going to get into that or speculate on that. I'm certainly not going to talk to anybody else. This is what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to take responsibility by apologizing, and by apologizing to the people I've let down. And I'm going to work to regain their trust. I am going to be accountable. We are going to cooperate completely with the ethics investigation.
Will you make will you make the findings of the ethics investigation public?
I will be open to that. That's going to be, of course, I've not worked with the ethics committee before, and I don't quite know how that works, but I'm certainly open to that. And I also, I'm going to try to learn from my mistakes. And in doing so, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and I want to be someone who adds something to this conversation, and I hope I can do that. Yeah, MJ, okay.
Yesterday you were unable to answer the question of whether more women would be coming out with allegations. It does seem that that's a question that only you can answer. What is the reason, can you tell us, that you can't definitively say that more women would not come out with more allegations of these kinds of stories?
Sure. If you had asked me 2 weeks ago, would any woman come forward with an allegation like this, I would have said no. And so I cannot speculate. This has been a shock, and it's been extremely humbling. I am embarrassed. I feel ashamed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start my job. I'm going to go back to work I'm going to work as hard as I can for the people of Minnesota, and I'm going to start that right now. Thank you all. Thank you.
So a very quick word from Senator Al Franken of Minnesota, who is facing up to 4 women now with allegations of groping and other inappropriate behavior by the senator. He did a quick round of questions there with reporters. We were waiting for him for about 20 minutes or so. We were told that he would step up to the microphones there on Capitol Hill and take their questions. I counted just a handful or fewer. He started off with, I'm hoping to work today. For the first time, he's back since these allegations have been made. Obviously, they're back, everybody in Congress, from the holiday break. Today, I can begin to take responsibility by apologizing to all those people who support him. One of the first questions was, what would it take? What's the bar, if you will, for resignation? Because the senator has said that he would not resign over these allegations. He says, quote, I'm not going to get into that. I want to be someone who can add to this conversation. And, of course, the conversation he's talking about is women, particularly in Congress. And this happened before he was a sitting senator. But women in this country coming from all walks of life in society with allegations of sexual harassment, allegations of sexual misconduct, and that is the conversation that I believe he's talking about. Also, he was asked why he could not exactly say whether more women would have allegations. And he said, well, quote, if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago that there would be the ones now, I would have said no. So I cannot speculate on this. But he plans to continue working beyond this one day back after these allegations were made on Capitol Hill. Please stay tuned to Fox News Channel and this Fox station for continuing coverage of the story. I'm Harris Faulkner in New York. And now we're back here on Fox News Channel. We gave our Fox broadcast stations through a Fox special report an opportunity to view the Senator Al Franken. And now we're back here on Fox News Channel, outnumbered overtime, and back from outnumbered, Jessica Tarlov, Senior Director of Research for Bustle.com and author of America in the Age of Trump, Steve Cortes, former member of the Trump Hispanic Advisory Council. They were both Fox News contributors. They were both talking to me just moments before Al Franken stepped to the microphone. So, Steve, we cut in as you were talking. I want to get back to you real quickly and get first thoughts. That certainly was very short from Senator Franken.
Right. To be honest, I'm not sure why he held that press conference. There was no new news there. Maybe he just felt obliged to get in front of the cameras, but nothing new out of him. But, you know, the point I was making before he came to the microphone is the dysfunction on Capitol Hill. And by the way, I would be as critical of Republicans as I am of Democrats on this score. The American people have work to do. We need work done, I should say, I guess, on Capitol Hill, particularly tax cuts. Instead, what are we focused on? We're focused on these ridiculous themes of sexual harassment. I don't mean ridiculous mean they're not true, but I'm saying this ridiculous behavior by members of Congress. And what I hate most of all is the fact that the Congress constructed for itself a secret mechanism by which it used taxpayer money to pay off and silence victims of sexual harassment by members of Congress. That astounds me. It's almost beyond belief. So, you know, talk about drain the swamp. Donald Trump was elected largely on a promise in 2016 that we would drain the swamp. The swamp is dirtier and murkier and worse than we could have ever imagined, especially on Capitol Hill.
You know, Jessica, what's interesting about what Steve is saying, and it was kind of there as Al Franken walked away from the microphones pretty quickly, because I heard you agreeing, wow, that was super short. What this does is more for Al Franken in terms of just kind of getting on the record, or does it move the ball forward for women? What's happening here? He says he wants to be part of a conversation. He didn't have much of one just then.
I think that he's talking about more of a legislative conversation and the conversation he'll have with the Ethics Committee, because, as we all know, he called for an investigation into himself. I think what Al Franken did right there was definitely for Al Franken insofar as appearing publicly contrite and also being the most available of the bevy of men who are being accused currently of sexual harassment does work in his favor. John Conyers is not going out there and doing a press avail right now. Maybe he'll be out at 4 p.m. I don't know. We can check with Neil Cavuto if he's going to get blown out for that. But at this moment, Al Franken has been the most open, the most present. He had the public apology immediately to Leanne Tweeden, and as he mentioned, she accepted his apology. He says he doesn't remember the other groping incidents, and he takes a lot of pictures, and we talked about that on the couch. Politicians do that. But I think that
no. Politicians take a lot of pictures.
No.
Politicians
No.
That's what I get it twisted.
No, I am not trying to twist it. I do not think all politicians do this. Obviously, I'm sure more do than we know about, but I'm not letting him off the hook, as it were. I think that he wanted to get out there and to show sad face, as it was, and to take a few questions and to make it clear that he'll be around. But this is obviously an incredibly difficult day for him. He said he's embarrassed and ashamed a number of times, and I can't imagine what it's like to face your peers at this moment when you know, as Steve said, that you've got important work to do and you're distracting everyone from an agenda with your bad behavior.
Steve, how do we move beyond this? I mean, you've got a senator who's just walked up to the microphone, said he's going to have a press avail, gave a few answers to some short questions, walks away and says, I'm basically going to work for the state of Minnesota as he's been promised to do.
Right. No, I think sunlight is the disinfectant that we need. All of those non-disclosure agreements that the victims signed and were in some ways almost coerced into signing, or at least bribed, I guess you could say, into signing to get financial settlements, all of those should be released. We need, I think, a serious investigation. This has gone on for years, $15 million of taxpayer money. And Senator Frank's not part of that, by the way, but he's clearly part of a culture, I think, on Capitol Hill where powerful people, I think all men, where powerful men use their position to manipulate others. And then on top of that, I mean, if that's not bad enough, use our money to cover up for their misdeeds. I mean, it's outrageous. This wouldn't happen in any other organization, I don't think, outside of government. So sunlight, to me, that's the answer. We need full transparency on these issues. But at the same time, too, Congress can't take its eye off the ball. We need tax cuts. Are these important issues? Of course they are.
Well,
but
I have an idea.
Americans,
why don't we have some of these Congress people give back some of the money? They could put $15 million back in the till.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know. It's not exactly a spending cut, but it's a start.
Well, we also know that it is more than just sexual harassment settlements that have been made, and we should find out what's in there as well. If they're discriminating for any reason, we should know they're spending our money.
Steve, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Congressman John Conyers stepping aside as the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, while an ethics committee looks into allegations against him, a Michigan Democrat, behaving inappropriately. We talk with one of the women now leveling accusations against him. She'll join me live. Stay close.
If you had, asked me 2 weeks ago, would any woman come forward with an allegation like this, I would have said no. And so I cannot speculate. This has been a shock, and it's been extremely humbling. I am embarrassed. I feel ashamed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start my job. I'm going to go back to work.
Senator Al Franken of Minnesota on the Capitol Hill just moments ago, taking just a few questions, talking about the allegations of groping by 4 women against him. He apologized. Obviously, he says he's back at work for the first time on Capitol Hill post the Thanksgiving break, and he's ready to get back to work and rehabilitate, I'm paraphrasing him now, his reputation, but also apologize to those people who support him. Senator Al Franken is one of many names right now that we are talking about on Capitol Hill, of men in particular who have stepped wrong, if you will. There's another we're going to talk about right now. Congressman John Conyers stepping down from his post as ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, and a congressional investigation into sexual harassment and workplace abuse allegations by some of his former women staffers. Conyers has denied any wrongdoing and says he looks forward to vindicating himself. Joining us now, Melanie Sloan, the first former Conyers staffer to speak on the record about the inappropriate behavior she says she witnessed while working with the congressman. Melanie, thank you for joining us. You have had quite a time on Capitol Hill working for others, and so you have a long history as a veteran on Capitol Hill. What did you experience with Representative Conyers?
Well, initially when I went to work for the House Judiciary Committee, which, by the way, was a great honor, and I was thrilled to be there, it was a terrific job. I worked on crime policy. Over time, my relationship with Mr. Conyers deteriorated as he became increasingly abusive to me. He would scream at me and berate me. And I know I've seen some tweets just saying, oh, well, you know, you're a snowflake. You can't have a tough boss. I can handle a tough boss. Congressman and now a minority leader Chuck Schumer was also my boss at one point, and he's a tough boss, but it's really not in the same, nothing in the same ballpark. Conyers would berate me horribly, and he once pulled me out of a meeting with domestic violence advocates, no less, and started screaming at me in the hallway. And berating me, I believe, for not wearing stockings on some 100-degree Washington day. There were other occasions where other things happened. I had organized a field hearing in New York City on a crime policy matter, and then he brought his young child with him, and then he told me to leave the stage and go backstage and babysit the child for the entire period of the hearing that I'd organized. And then there was the other instance where I was called to go into his office, and he was walking around in his underwear.
Yeah, that is the most recent one that I have read, and one that is more consistent with the type of inappropriate behavior that has become the focal point right now on some cases in Capitol Hill. There is part of your experience, though, that I want to ask you about, whether it was something that you had happen with you or that you knew about with other women, because now it's coming to light that there's a money trail, that at least one person who is alleged inappropriate behavior against Conyers was paid $27,000 basically to keep her mouth shut and to make the case go away.
Right. Well, that's certainly quite common in settlement agreements, not just with this woman, but settlement agreements for harassment or all sorts of employment claims. Quite generally, there's a settlement agreement and there's a non-disclosure agreement whereby the person who receives payment is not allowed to say anything. It's, of course, more troubling that this is how it's dealt with on Capitol Hill, given that this is taxpayer money, and then the voters don't have an opportunity to learn about a member's behavior when they next go to the ballot box.
Did you speak out at the time when this was happening?
I did, in fact, speak out at the time. I tried to speak to somebody. Obviously, I spoke to my supervisor, who tried, I think, to talk to the congressman to no avail. At the time, Dick Gephardt was the minority leader, and I spoke to one of his top staffers about the problem. I spoke to somebody who worked at a major women's group and asked her to intercede on my behalf. And then eventually I even talked to a reporter, but then that reporter went back and talked to another staff member for Conyers at the time, trying to corroborate some of what I said. And that staff member, a woman, told him that I was mentally unstable. And so then he said, well, if you're mentally unstable, I can't do anything with this story. And as you can imagine, all of that was pretty disheartening. And so eventually I left.
You know, the congressman has come forth with his own statement. You had 12 women who were former staffers of his who've come forth and supporting his position on all of this, not just with you, but with other women who have allegations against him. What do you think needs to happen right now?
Well, I think it's good that there's going to be an ethics committee investigation into Mr. Conyers' behavior. I have to say, I'm not overly optimistic. The House Ethics Committee has never been known for taking a tough stance for unethical conduct by any member of Congress. It's often just a black hole where allegations go to die and we never hear about them again. And that way, other members of Congress can say, well, it's before the House Ethics Committee, so I can't talk about it, and we'll wait for their review, and then they sort of never come up with a review. So I am a little concerned about that. I think it is good we're talking about legislation that will have mandatory harassment training, but training is really not sufficient. I mean, there has to be repercussions for these members of Congress. Do I think he should leave Congress? I don't know. I think it's like so many Americans, I'm really on the fence about what should happen about all of these allegations. I definitely think there needs to be a process by which members of Congress are held accountable for their conduct, though.
Wow. I mean, to hear what you're saying about what happened with all of the reporting that you did contemporaneously, and then basically you were called mentally incapable, that's something that's been said about women making complaints for many, many decades at this point. Melanie Sloan, we appreciate you coming forth, one of the many women who have come forth against Representative Conyers today, to tell your story. Thank you very much for your time. President Trump right now is meeting with members of the Senate Finance Committee. This is a huge story that affects Americans across the country. They're talking tax reform. You know, there's a big tax vote now looming in the Senate. The House did theirs. They've moved forward. Now it's in the Senate's hands. We'll talk directly live with Senator Chuck Grassley next. Big day. Stay with us.